Good to go?
We're good.
All right, let's do this.
All right, well, we're ready for our next speaker. So I've been very excited about this talk for a long, long time. I'm a big fan of Chris Campbell and his work. So he's going to be talking about using Microsoft's incident response language. So everybody, please join me in welcoming Mr. Chris Campbell.
All right, thank you. I've got about an hour and a half worth of material and 45 minutes to do with it. So this is going to go a little quick. This is PowerShell and you using Microsoft's incident response language. That's a little tongue-in-cheek. Obviously, PowerShell was not actually written to be an incident response language. This is who I am. I'm currently a security researcher slash pen tester for the Harris Corporation. I was in the Army for a while, served with some of the people in this room. I was an operator on the Army Red Team for just over 4 years. I currently code occasionally for a tool called PowerSploit, which is anyone ever heard of PowerSploit? Wow, a lot more people than normal. PowerShell-based post-exploitation framework. I've given a lot of talks. I recently had the opportunity to talk at DEF CON, which was kind of crazy. I'm ObscureSec on Twitter. Frequent vitriol towards Microsoft and AD and other security FUD. I blog at obscuresec.com. A quick plug that I don't normally do. We have tons of openings. So if you're interested in doing security research or making the jump, get with me or just go to the Harris website. All right, let's jump right into the memes. So before we get started, one of the biggest problems that I experience with PowerShell is the immediate assumption that hackers don't use Windows at all, which is kind of silly. It's, hackers end up on Microsoft Windows boxes. They've got to be able to do stuff. So instead, what we have is people that only wear clothing, but have $3,500 MacBook Pros. So then they bring Python to their environment, and they decide to install Python on boxes. So you'll still run into this even today, even though PowerShell's got a lot of adoption. Where it kind of all goes back to, and I like to point people back, Matt Graber and I have kind of been credited a lot of places as being one of the first in the security industry to do PowerShell. And that's just not the case. There were lots of people that were doing it before us. We were writing PowerShell before DEF CON 18. Jason Fawson has a SANS class, that the Securing Windows class covered PowerShell that I took prior to that with great material. But this talk at DEF CON 18 is really what got us to start PowerSploit. If you haven't seen it, it's still very relevant material. It's why PowerShell is awesome for hackers. So that is online if you just Google DEF CON 18, Dave Kennedy. So this year there was a great talk by some of the guys from Mandiant about investigating PowerShell attacks. So what we're seeing now is PowerShell is actively being used in malware a lot. Now that we're looking for it, we're finding it. It's amazing how that works. So that talk this year is about what to look for to see if PowerShell is being used. So there's a lot more talk about PowerShell. It's also being used in lots of tools like the Veil framework, Cobalt Strike. There's PowerShell specific tools. We already talked about PowerSploit. Carlos Perez does PoshSec mod. He pushes thousands of lines to that seemingly at night. It's awesome. The PoshSec guys are focusing on incident response, network defense, situational awareness. So if you haven't checked that out, it's awesome. Probably one of the easiest ways to jump into using PowerShell in your environment. They built an entire GUI tool in front of it so that you can easily leverage tools that have already been written. And then phishing is another pen testing PowerShell framework. So I hear this a lot, and we kind of talked about this. A lot of people in information security, I guess I should gauge who do we have here? Do we have system administrators? A couple. Incident responders? A lot. Did any of the red team folks sneak over here? A few, including myself. This is something that I ran into. You almost can't be in InfoSec if you don't know Python, because the majority of the tools are written in Python. Python's an easy language to learn. I'm not saying don't learn Python. What I am saying is that Python is not installed by default in most environments, and if it is, if they install Python default installer on Windows, they introduce the privilege escalation vulnerability. But we won't go into that. You're going to have to learn Python. You should probably learn some lower level languages as well. But PowerShell is an easy language to pick up, and it gives you a lot more that you don't currently have. So, like I just said, it's easy, and it's already there. It's not just already there. A full development environment is already there. You don't have to install any additional tools. You can just go ahead and jump right in. The biggest thing that PowerShell brings you for both the incident response and from a pen tester perspective is you don't have to write to disk. 99% of the tutorials that are online, somehow that escapes them, and you see them writing PS1 to the disk and then executing it. You don't ever have to do that. There's no reason, if you're an incident responder and you don't want the malware or the attacker to know that you're investigating that box, you don't have to drop something on the disk that would potentially alert them. You can shove PowerShell directly into memory and accomplish everything that you need. Obviously, that gives you AD avoidance for free, so that's cool if you're a bad guy. And that last point I added, it's really going that way with Server 2012. Is anyone using Server 2012 in server core mode? A couple people? You guys like that? It's awesome. So server core mode is just a really stripped down, almost Linux. Server 2012. It's probably the only thing I would only Windows server I deployed to the internet. It comes hardened well beyond what you would expect. But the only way to interact with it is with PowerShell. So if you don't know PowerShell, there's almost nothing you can do on a server core. There's no GUI installed. So you have to interact over PS remoting. Anybody read this blog post or see this malware? There have actually been some newer examples, but they didn't have as cool a Excel spreadsheet to throw up there. PowerShell is being used for the same reason that we're advocating everyone learning PowerShell. It is so much easier to do things in Windows environments with PowerShell. So this is a macro that was sent. They named it PowerWorm, and it is malware that was almost completely written in PowerShell. And it was using a technique that has been around forever that we use on the red team quite often. So you send a legitimate looking spreadsheet and you tell people, hey, just go ahead and enable this macro, and they do, and then it executes PowerShell, and then you do whatever you want. So let's talk about what PowerShell is. So at the most obvious thing about PowerShell is it's no longer commands, right? It's not cmd.exe, it's not the black shell that you're used to. It's blue. So there's that. So if you've got a Windows laptop, not this showman, maybe that is, or it's a MacBook lookalike, you can just start one and type in PowerShell and you can get started. But it's not just a shell. It's not just what you're used to with command.com or cmd.exe. It comes with hundreds and now thousands of built-in commandlets. And how the PowerShell team envisioned these commandlets were to basically be the replacements of all the command line utilities you've ever used on Windows. So instead of learning all these utilities that were written by all these different developers, they all return different types of data. Like anyone that's ever had to parse ipconfig, like that's not fun. So what they decided to do is use PowerShell and the commandlets to make the admin interface so much easier and ubiquitous. So it's also its own scripting language, and this rubs people the wrong way. It's very different, which we'll talk about, from other scripting languages. It does give you access to the .NET framework and COM objects. So if you use VB, you can jump right into the COM objects. And one of my favorite things and the most powerful part of PowerShell is you can run inline C# and it gives you direct access to the entire Windows API. So the bottom line with that sentence is that there's nothing in PowerShell that you can't do that if you could do it on Windows. If you can do it with an executable with C, you can do it in the scripting language PowerShell. So the commandlets, they're useful commands. They're meant to be glued together using the scripting language. Has anyone written more than a 50-line batch script before? I am so sorry. So PowerShell is designed to make sure you never have to do that again. Right now, there's almost no reason to write VB. Unless your environment is all Windows 2000, you can install, all right, I heard chuckles. Whose environment is Windows 2000? Okay, thank God. All right, so you can install PowerShell on Server 2003, XP. You don't even need PowerShell installed for a lot of the WMI functionality that's built in. So although it doesn't seem intuitive, the commands are verb noun. Once you understand it's verb singular noun, once you get that, you'll just guess at commandlets all the time, and you'll be right a lot of the times. It's like, if I want to learn more about this commands, get commands, right? It makes sense once you start doing it. That last line, this gets a lot of people, especially if you're going to write scripts and push them out, or write functions and push them out. The ultimate way you want to display the output is left up to the user. Like if you want it in an HTML report, you put it in an HTML report. Like the developer, the tool writer, it's not their job to decide how you're going to parse the data in the end. It's only to return the objects. So if you want to get started in PowerShell, this is the best way to do it, to learn these. These are the discovery commandlets. Get alias. So there are aliases built in for each one of the commandlets. So if you were to just type in ifconfig or ipconfig, it's going to go through things like grep. People will set an alias. All of those built-in commands that you're used to, if they work in PowerShell, it's because they're an alias to a commandlet. If you want to figure out what the actual commandlet is, you can use get alias, get command if you just want to guess. You can use asterisks. Get verb if you're writing your own tool and you want to figure out what the verb should be. So task get child item is essentially dir. So the alias, if you type in dir in PowerShell, that is an alias to get child item. Get content is a way to read in a file. Get process, I guess it's there. Right, so get service. It's pretty, it should be easy to pick up. Some people complain about it. One note, don't use invoke expression. A lot can go wrong in your scripts. Invoke expression is used to call external binaries. So a lot of problems that I'm seeing as a pen tester, I'm seeing admins write really powerful scripts, and that's awesome, except they're not developers and they have no concept of security. So this is a way to it basically allow you to inject commands. Command injection vulnerabilities out the wazoo when you start using invoke expression. And Microsoft's just as guilty of doing that. And then test path if you want to see if something's there. So once you get the object returned, these are ways to format list, format wide. So sometimes you're not getting all the data displayed to you at the end. It's all there. You just have to use the correct formatter for it to display. Outhost, there are people guilty of this in this room. If you use outhost, puppy will die. A huge monster puppy will die. Outhost is the equivalent of echoing the results out to standard out. The problem is there's so much more data than what is going to be echoed out, and you're making the decision for the end user. So you're already taking away data that they could potentially want. So what you want to do is shove it into an object and then return the object. So don't use outhost. So I'm going to put all these slides up because we're moving through this stuff pretty quickly, and you can go back over it. I really like PowerShell providers. Basically, they take every way to interact, whether it be Exchange, SharePoint, search stores, Active Directory, SQL. The registry is a really cool one, and they make it seem like it's a part of the file system. So then you can interact like it's part of the file system. So you can just walk registry keys and hives like they're file folders, and that makes script writing a lot easier, I've found. So those are, if you do get PS Provider, you'll see all the providers that have been loaded. So as a scripting language, it is a replacement for VB script. Does anyone in here had to write VB script? Is anyone here still writing VB script? I'm sorry. So if you wrote VB script, that was my first scripting language. I found it very easy to jump into PowerShell. I've read that some people have found that to be difficult. I think it's a lot easier to go from VB script, which is a crazy language, to another crazy language, PowerShell, than going from, say, Python or Ruby to PowerShell. But PowerShell has everything you would expect it to have, like any other scripting language. It has everything that VB has. But the biggest difference is the focus is on returning objects, dealing with objects, and not returning strings. So all the magic of Bash and Python and Ruby, a lot of it comes down to string manipulation, focusing on strings. With PowerShell, you are going to stick with objects, and we'll talk about what an object is. A cool thing that Python interpreter does it as well is you can run everything from the interpreter. So when you open up PowerShell.exe, you can copy and paste the script function block and just dump it in there, and it'll run it. So it'll process all of that stuff. It can be ran directly from the command line. So you can say PowerShell.exe space dash command space and give it a script block, and it will run it. So you can turn any script into a command line utility that way. And I do a lot of pen testing related stuff. And it doesn't have to be, I never use PS1 files. So a lot of times I get troubleshooting emails where they're like, I wrote this to a PS1. So most of the time when people release scripts, they're actually releasing functions. So those functions have never been called. So then all you have to do if you want to make it a PS1 is to call the function at the bottom, and then it'll run the function. But the reason, like for PowerSploit, for example, the reason we don't call the functions is because we don't want you to write our scripts to a PS1 and have AV suck it up and potentially flag. So by not calling it, it forces you to use it at the command line, or so we thought. But we do get a lot of emails. All right. So objects versus strings. I say this is a difficult concept. I don't think it's really that difficult, but if you're used to Bash and you're used to string manipulation, like it just seems to me like people who are used to string manipulation really want to do string manipulation. And when you're like, no, you don't have to do that, they still go out of their way to do it. So you'll see them take an object and then put it into a variable, cast that variable as a string, and then do string manipulation, and then you've got like 40 or 50 lines of logic that didn't ever need to be there. So objects have properties and methods. So a string is a string, and it'll automatically cast it based on the characters. Those properties, like in this case, $string is a variable. The property of that length will give you the length of the variable. The toUpper is a method. When you call that method, it will then take the string and send it to upper. So there are built-in variables, environment variables. One you'll see used often is computer name. A cool thing you can do if you're not familiar with all the built-in environment variables, just start with $ENV : and just start tabbing and you can walk through all the ones that are there. There are built-in variables. That top one, $_ is the built-in pipeline variable. There's the arguments variable, which I use seldomly. True, false, null. You can is everyone familiar with casting? So in PowerShell, it'll do its best to guess at what, and it's normally right, at what type of variable. I sometimes go out of my way to cast something if I know it's going to cause problems, so you can do that. That's how you declare a empty array. There's actually lots of ways of doing it to index into an array. All of this stuff is very similar to other scripting languages. All the operators are very similar. Comparison operators. Lots of ways to do conditional logic. So if that condition equals true, do something, else if, else. Don't need the else if. Switch statements, all this stuff is in a lot of different scripting language. You can do, as with every other language, there are lots of ways to accomplish the same thing. So especially with looping, any way that you want to do it, you can pretty much do it in PowerShell. So .NET and COM objects are pretty well documented on MSDN. So if you see some way in .NET, something in .NET that interests you, then it's pretty easy to pull that into PowerShell. All you have to do is create a variable and then use the new object commandlet. And then if you're using the ISE, I find this very useful. You just system.net, and then as you're going through, you get a drop-down in version 3, ISE version 3 and newer. You get a drop-down of all the different things within .NET Framework that you can play with. So this is something that you'll see in almost all of that malware that's out there. I think there's 4 or 5 public PowerShell malware. And they almost always do this. They use the system.net.web client. So they create that object, and then they pull some material from external web server, pull that down, and then invoke it. So that's all that's needed to pull down external PowerShell and run it. So this is fun if you want to get back at some of your coworkers. So this is going to hold down the volume up button. Because that while loop is always going to equal true. Because true is true until it's false. And then it will use the wscript.shell to send key 175, which is the volume up. So you can put this in a loop if you want them to not be able to turn their volume off. It's lots of fun. Yeah. So we'll talk about that. We'll footnote on disabling PowerShell.
Does it require administrative privilege?
No.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. No, that is the functional equivalent of sitting there right next to them holding volume up. It's actually not even holding volume up. It's repeatedly pushing volume up like every millisecond. So if they just hit, sound off, as soon as you hit volume up, it enables the sound again. Lots of fun. So C#. So you can grab if you're if you're in a pinch and you see a C# application and you want to turn it into a PowerShell script, you can literally just do this wrapper. You can take an entire C# app, wrap it in those lines, and then boom, it's a PowerShell script, and it'll run from the PowerShell interpreter or through. That's not always going to be the way that you want to do something, because it's going to call csc.exe, the C# compiler. That's going to leave lots of forensic artifacts. So if you're an incident responder, that's something you might want to look for. All the malware that I've seen, this is what they're doing. They're not using any sort of reflective techniques to ensure that they're not actually writing to disk. So Matt Graber wrote a really good series of blog posts on the Hey Scripting Guy on TechNet, which is interesting because it's all about how to not leave forensic artifacts on a disk when you're exploiting it and using PowerShell. So that's on TechNet. I think it's a 3-part series, and this is the last part. It's focusing on reflection. This is using add type, which is going to call CSE and potentially leave a lot of evidence behind. All right, so the pipeline is how you glue things together. So you run one commandlet that's going to return objects. When you take that and send it to another commandlet or between your own functions, you're using the pipeline. So you can filter on exactly what you need in the pipeline using $_, and then you can do dot to call different properties. In order for your function to accept pipeline input, you've got to write that in, and it's actually pretty easy to do. I don't see that many people with their laptops out, but if you do, and you have PowerShell installed, and you're not using Windows 8 because for some reason they had to change that. Maybe it was 8.1. You start one, you type PowerShell, it shows, on a 64-bit box, you've got the 32-bit version, 64-bit, and then the ISE. Now you've actually got to type out PowerShell _ISE on Windows 8 for it to show up, which is kind of silly. But then when you pull it up, you've got a full-blown integrated scripting environment with a built-in debugger. I used to pay for commercial products before the ISE existed, but now I don't, because it's got everything you need. You can attach to remote instance. Between PS remoting and the ISE, you can do almost anything. It is really awesome. Is that what you guys are using? Are you using the ISE? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I haven't run into too many people that are using the commercial products. So let's go ahead and talk about execution policy, since it always comes up. It's not a security feature. It does not stop anything. It might stop you from reading some Microsoft material and then being able to do what it's saying to do, which is run a .ps1. But as long as you get away from running a .ps1, that is all it's going to stop. It's going to stop someone emailing a .ps1 and then them double-clicking it and then executing PowerShell. That is it. So this is on a system where it was set, execution policy was set to not allow any scripts to run, and that little encoded command is base64, and all it is saying, that base64 block is just saying IEX, which is an alias for invoke expression, space count.exe, invoke count.exe, and PowerShell invoked count.exe, bypassing something that wasn't intended to need to be bypassed. So if you talk to anyone at Microsoft, they will just flatly ignore execution policy discussion because it's not a security feature. All right. So you thought this was a blue team talk, but I'm a red teamer. So I'll briefly go into basically how I use PowerShell and a fun game that my friends play called PowerShell Golf. And what we do is, because we're limited to 8,192 characters to be ran at the command line, because that is the command.com limit for the longest command syntax you can have on a Windows box, we like to see how big a script how much can we accomplish in 8,192 lines. There's different ways to do it. You could stage the script on a web server and use that block that I showed you before to download it and execute it. Alternatively, you could compress and encode the script, but I like PowerShell Golf. So PowerShell Golf is like Python Golf or Ruby Golf. It's just using getAlias to find and setAlias to create your own aliases that are 1 character long to do things that you'll see. I've taken a script that was like 4,000 or 5,000 characters, 4,000 or 5,000 lines on GitHub, and broken it down and got it under the 8,192 characters by just getting rid of error handling, who needs that? Comments, and so I just thought I would share a little of that. So again, 8,191 character limit, and what we want to create is PowerShell.exe dash command, and then something that fits those last 8. So 8,000 characters. Anyone know what this is doing?
The shell coupling. The third-party shell coupling.
So this was when I originally wrote this script, and this idea was popularized by Tim Tomes, the team here, and Mark Baggett. It's awesome. It's a way of pulling the system and SAM without needing actual system level privileges, without needing to process inject into LSAS. It's pretty nifty. So you're going to use volume shadow copy, the service that may or may not already be running, to make a copy of those and give them to you. So in VB, the name of the tool escapes me. What was the tool that they wrote? BSides, right. BSides, I believe, over 1,000 lines of code. In PowerShell, this is BSides. So that's pretty cool. And there are lots of ways you could actually shrink this down, just looking at it. And this is actually doing a lot. I mean, it's checking to see if the service is starting the service, and that's pretty cool. So once you shrink it down, and I actually took the next step of encoding it into base64, and sometimes you have to do that because there'll be characters in there that'll mess with the interpreter. But that is a single one-liner that will work from engagement to engagement to dump system and SAM to whatever folder I want. So with only admin privileges, I can dump the password hashes and roll on. So the staged approach is hosting on a web server. Lots of different ways to do this. I originally was using Apache, and I had all kinds of encoding issues. I think I blogged about that. Metasploit has the PSH web delivery module. Also, I like to use a lot of Python-based web servers, depending on the engagement. Or you can use PowerShell, and this is a web server written in PowerShell. Again, using the .NET HTTP listener. That's it. That's how easy it is to write your own web server. So that's going to host up anything that's in the supplied directory. So this little trick, Lee Holmes is on the PowerShell team. He's awesome. He wrote the PowerShell cookbook in version 2, version 3. He's the head of security for the PowerShell team. So he's been very responsive, and he's a really smart guy. But he tweeted a couple years ago about this trick, and I still don't understand. But if you within PowerShell.exe, if you have the interpreter up and you call cmd echo and echo in a script block, it will drop it into all of its different formats. So it's some shortcut that they built in. And then you can use the split method to split the different ones, and we just want the second one, 0, 1 of the array that it creates. So that'll give you, instead of creating a base64 object to take your script, this is actually a really easy way to do it. But you don't even have to encode it. You can just give it the -com, that's shorthand for command. As long as it can distinguish it, you can shorten any of the parameters down, and that's built in even on your own scripts. It'll do that. So, does anyone know what this is doing? So this is using, on the other end of that bit.ly link, and I guarantee it's still there because that's GitHub. So this will work on any of your engagements if you trust Matt Graber and his GitHub, and he doesn't go in and change the code that's on the end of that. That's going to download invoke shellcode from PowerSploit, and then The payload is pretty obvious what it is, reverse HTTPS, and then you're giving it the port and where your listener is. And the reason I'm adding the -force flag is without the -force flag, it's going to ask you a bunch of questions. Like, hey, you know you're popping a shell on this box? Sure you wanted it? Are you really sure? So this will work to get you a interpreter shell on any Windows box connected to the internet. So PowerShell can actually be used in exploitation. In the Dale talk earlier, it was brought up that they're creating executables that can't really be used in buffer overflow. In the same way, PowerShell is never really going to be used in a buffer overflow scenario. You're going to write real native shell code. But if you're doing exploitation that leads you anything command injection related, whether it be web or service or SQL, it makes it so much easier. If you've ever been going against a box that is isolated and you're trying to put code on that box, you're trying to download an executable and FTP has been removed, TFTP has been removed. If you've ever done the OSCP, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This definitely makes that situation a lot easier and faster. So I've burned this a couple times in talks, so I'll burn it again because I don't use it anymore. But I used this for a while. That's the spreadsheet that I would send to your users that they would, for some reason, click on every single time. So that was the splash screen. You need to enable macros, and they would do that. Down here you've got the VBA, the VB that was actually being run. And there's an example for popping calc. So that's how easy it is to create a macro that will then execute PowerShell. So there's obviously a lot of post-exploitation scenarios that PowerShell helps. You can quickly automate, if you found a specific privilege escalation vulnerability, you can quickly automate finding that specific one. You can automate discovery of lots of them. Enumerating Active Directory in one line, I'll show you that in a second. Locate users, brute force, you name it, you can do it with PowerShell, and you can automate all of it. So you're no longer sitting there when the shell comes in. You don't even really need the shell. So a lot of people are looking for C2, and PowerShell allows you to not need C2. You could script everything, every check into your payload and just sit back and wait for the results. So whereas incident responders and defenders are looking for beacons back out, with PowerShell, I mean, you could have built this into the payload before in any other language, but it makes it much easier. We're seeing malware that is trying to do as much of the automation on the front end and only present back the credit cards on the back end. So you're no longer looking for shells or beacons out of your network. It's built into the payload, so when it lands one time, the only thing that's going out after that is not them digging around looking through your network for months. It's just the goals that they found. So for every bit of value you get as an attacker using PowerShell, you get as much and more as an incident responder, because you can control your environment beforehand as a defender, and you cannot tip your hand by staying in memory with PowerShell. So as a red teamer, it was always fun to do live engagements where we had incident responders brought in, and we got to read their reports and see how far off they were, or not, or if they caught us. But we would see them get on the boxes and use their credentials. In one particular incident, we didn't even have domain level creds. We had only gotten local on a couple boxes, but they were so eager to log into those boxes and use PSExec to push their incident response tools that they handed us their incident responder domain admin creds. And that's the only way we privilege escalated. We had spent 4 or 5 days trying to figure out how to get domain admin, and then we just decided to be loud enough to see if they would come right in, and sure enough they did. So using, not using PSExec, using PS remoting, using WMI, you can avoid putting your credentials onto remote boxes. You can quickly look for different signatures. If you have an individual problem set specific to your organization, there are going to be things that you can identify, easy ways for you to signature something. This gives you another way, instead of pushing it to a vendor and waiting for them to come back and give you a signature, you can quickly create your own tool and go out and look for that compromise on other boxes. Here's a quick example of that. Persistence, there are not that many ways to do it. There was a good talk, the Encyclopedia of Persistence. You can go through and look. It's pretty much been documented almost every way, and there's some new ways that come out. So I like to look at persistence as an easy thing to signature. So as long as the group is using the same method of persistence, if they're dropping something, so this is my persistence technique, circa 2004, 2005, dropping an executable in the startup directory. Doesn't really work as well today. But if you wanted to go look, if they named it malware.exe and you wanted to look across your enterprise, that top line, domain computers, using the EDSI searcher type accelerator, you can get every box on the domain like that and then enumerate over them. You can script things that would take hundreds of lines in Python, you can script them up very easily in PowerShell. So I've seen this. I had a client actually build their own IDS, like host-based IDS, all written in PowerShell. It's actually really cool. The PoshSec guys are basically going for that same thing with their agent, so you should check that out. It's actually really easy to build your own IDS. The beauty of that is they're not going to know how to bypass it because they've never seen it before. So that's pretty cool from that perspective. You can automate hashing and submitting of binaries to virus total, which every pen tester in here should cringe at. I've seen that as well. I did that recently when I was looking through the Chocolatey server, looking for malware in some of their packages. I just installed all the Chocolatey packages and then went through and hashed and submitted them all to virus total and found a ton that virus total flagged as being malicious. Log review is the biggest thing that PowerShell gives you. You can very quickly, has anyone worked in a shop where you actually reviewed Windows logs, servers? Yeah. All right, 3 of you are in the same shop, so it is a pain. PowerShell makes it a lot easier and a lot faster, and I'll show you that really quickly in a second. You can generate random passwords. You can, all the little utilities that you would otherwise have, you can do it all in PowerShell. So the PSExec module in Metasploit creates a service on the remote box. It uses, and you can change it now, but it used to use the same pattern, same number of characters, and always, for some reason, started with an M. So if you wanted to go through and look for that across every single box to see if someone used the Metasploit MSF PSExec module against the box, anywhere in your enterprise, you could quickly do that with this function. So this bottom part, that's how to return something as an object with all the data that you would want. So really, those 3 lines on top, that's it for finding that within the logs. So if you want to learn more, these are my 3 favorite PowerShell books, because I get this question every time I give a talk related to PowerShell or have a discussion. The PowerShell in a Month of Lunches book, especially if you've ever scripted before, is very basic. You can get through that in 30 days. Obviously, that's the premise of the book. You can get through it in a couple days if you really buckle down. Do all the labs, but once you get the basics, and they kind of explain, Don and Jeff do a good job explaining a lot of the basics, the differences, the quirks of PowerShell. The tool making is really the better book, because the tool making gets you into the thought process behind returning objects, how you can build these great HTML reports for your management, how to really make yourself valuable to your organization and speed up your workflow. And then I find myself going to Lee Holmes' book a lot, not because I need to see the examples, because it's pretty intuitive to jump in and do something. But if you want to see another better recommended way, since he is on the actual PowerShell team, almost all of his examples are how they wanted you to do it. So what I like to do is use some of the performance measurement commandlets to do it my way, and then go to the book and then do it his way, and realize that in his way, milliseconds, and my way, it's 30 seconds. So there's a lot of really good knowledge to glean doing that through the cookbook. It's sold out, so I'm sorry to teach you. Carlos Perez teaches a PowerShell class. He moved it from just a basic class to an advanced PowerShell class. Is anyone going to that? A couple people, awesome. So yeah, I'll be there. DerbyCon's awesome. You should go. Get on Twitter and ask for tickets. Speaking of getting on Twitter, if you want to learn more, these are some good security folks and PowerShell folks to follow. Matt Graber started PowerSploit. Joe Biotic, he's a Microsoft guy that's contributed a ton to PowerSploit. Matt Johnson and Ben 10 are, I talked about them earlier. And then Jeff Snover and Ed Wilson do a lot of the Microsoft PowerShell related blogging. So I'm going to throw these slides up on my blog sometime this weekend. I'm ObscureSec on Twitter, and that's my Gmail, and that's my coworkers all the time, because I talk about PowerShell too much. I think I'm right on time. I've got a Raspberry Pi courtesy of Rural Technology Fund for the best question. So I'll take 3 questions, and then we'll do this that way.
Quick question. You had an example before where you were kind of iterating through larger objects and just throwing off some of the subfields.
Right.
You know, is that kind of similar to Python where it just creates references to those objects so the objects hang around, or does it actually copy the data inside?
That's not a very efficient way to do things. It actually copies them over and holds them. There are much better ways of accomplishing that if performance is your concern.
You're talking about doing things in memory so that they don't show up. But doesn't the fact that you execute in PowerShell, isn't there a PowerShell event log or something? I thought I remember hearing about it previously.
So if you never run PowerShell the first time, it's PowerShell.exe is called. It's going to create a whole bunch of logging. You will almost always be able to tell that PowerShell.exe was called. But if your admin's already using PowerShell, it's already been called, and it's going to be called regularly. So yes, you will see that. And if you go and enable a couple of options, like the command line logging, and they're making it a lot easier in PowerShell version 5 and moving forward with Windows 9. If you use that trick where you put the whole script on the command line, that parameter will show up right in the log. So then you can easily parse it out, pull it out, and see what was actually executed. But if they're using a stager and they put it on some SSL or slightly encrypted web server and it pulls down, there's no way to go back and decide, what was actually run on that box, unless you scrape all of memory while it's running.
So in the stealthiness mode, you can at least find out that something happened in PowerShell, and if your admin said that wasn't us, you know that somebody did something.
Correct. As long as it's not SharePoint Exchange or any of the other things that are automatically calling PowerShell now. Yeah, you can't really get away from it. I believe someone was saying disable power. It's not really possible. I would ACL it off, make sure that if you don't want your users calling PowerShell.exe, go ahead and do that. The other thing that I didn't talk about is it completely undermines all application whitelisting. If you have PowerShell.exe whitelisted, which if you have application whitelisting, you do, because you can't run Windows, any modern Windows without PowerShell. So the whole thought, well, I'll just get rid of PowerShell, I think is dated and old, and not really the way. Microsoft's trying to give you lots of ways of locking PowerShell down. There's ways, just like with everything else, for you to go in and configure and only expose what commandlets you want exposed, but that only works as long as they don't use invoke expression or any other the other ways that you could remotely or locally bypass all of those filters. Might be a convoluted answer, but you can always see that PowerShell was run. That's it. It's the current state.
So that was kind of what my question was. Have you run across in any of your testing and your work any environments that have PowerShell disabled?
Yes, I was handed a laptop and said, do your worst, and they had gone in and they had locked down PowerShell from normal users from being able to run PowerShell.
That's the worst you've seen.
That's the worst that I've seen. After a Black Hat talk, a gentleman told me that prior to coming to Black Hat and seeing the talk, he decided to go back and push XP to all of his workstations to get rid of the PowerShell threat, which is the most disappointing thing I've ever come across.
It's sort of like using a flamethrower to get rid of the spider you found in your house, right?
Right. It's like GM ignition failure. I'm going to go back to no airbags and a car from the 50s.
So I heard a reference to this question sometime during your talk, but it wasn't asked really loudly. How much does what you did today, how much does like user account control get involved, like what PowerShell can do?
PowerShell doesn't break the authentication model. So your rights, your integrity level, all are the same as if you were executing a binary. There's no magic to what is going on. Anything that goes on in PowerShell could go on in C# with the interpreter. Any of that stuff, PowerShell doesn't do anything to undermine the security model of Windows. So if an attacker can run PowerShell, they could run an executable, unless you have application whitelisting, and PowerShell is the way that they're bypassing that. Where we're seeing the malware authors, where we as pen testers, Matt and I have been talking about this for a couple of years now, and people have frankly ignored us, is that it's easier, because it's only easier if you go and learn it. The malware authors are now learning it, and they're like, wow, I can build some really crazy crypto locker malware and use .NET, and this works really well, so I'm just going to use this from now on. I don't have to learn C. I saw some Russian crypto locker-ish malware maybe 2.5 years ago. So I'm sure it's been out a long time. But someone just posted the script to a blog and was like, oh, what does this do? And then Matt and I looked at it, and it was sure enough looking for every PowerPoint, Excel, and Word document, and then encrypting all of them using AES in a random key that it would ship off one time. So if you didn't catch that key on its way out to their server, yeah. Full packet. Again. All right, I'm going to go with the performance question, just because that was the only one I actually didn't answer. It's yours, right? Any other questions?
Have you in fact married PowerShell?
I have not married PowerShell.
Are you engaged?
I am not engaged.